I would like to welcome our keynote presenter this morning, Stanford Searl. During the spring of 2020, Stanford worked as the Carroll Research Scholar at Pendle Hill. And there he completed 55 interviews, mostly virtual because of the pandemic, with friends, asking them about the meanings of the Quaker gathered meeting. In 2019, the Poetry Box published his poetry chapbook, Mary Dyer's Hymn and Other Quaker Poems. Also in 2019, another small press published Songs for Diana, a poetry chapbook about the life, death, and meaning of Stan and his wife's severely handicapped child, Diana Margaret. In 2016, another small press published a full-length poetry book, Homage to the Lady with the Dirty Feet and Other Vermont Poems. In 2005, Searl completed 2 books about research into the meanings of silence in Quaker worship, including Voices from the Silence and the Meanings of Silence in Quaker Worship. Stan lives in Culver City, California, with his wife, Rebecca, both members of Santa Monica Monthly Meeting, and they expect to welcome their 9th grandchild in early November of this year. Welcome, and thank you for joining us, Stan, to be our keynote presenter to talk about your research on the gathered meeting.
Thank you so much, Jane. I really appreciate it. I appreciate being here in the quarter. Can you hear me all right? Is that sound okay? Okay, thank you. I really appreciate being here. I'd like to start with a centering hymn, if I can. And Lawrence, why don't you do the PowerPoint? So I have a PowerPoint of 35 slides. I expect to talk for like 45 minutes, and then we'll have questions and answers and reflections. Thank you, Lawrence. Let's go to the next slide. Thank you. This is a wonderful hymn, a mid-19th century hymn. Longfellow the poet's younger brother wrote the words, and the great composer Louis Gottschalk wrote the music. It's adapted from one of his pieces. He was a wonderful composer and pianist in the 19th century. This helps me to be centered and to be whole in this work. I'll sing the first two verses. Holy Spirit, truth divine, dawn upon this soul of mine. Word of God and inward light, wake my spirit, clear my sight. One more verse. Holy Spirit, love divine, glow within this heart of mine. Kindle every high desire, wake perish self in thy pure fire. Thank you, friends, so much for being here today. I want to thank Jane as our presiding clerk. I want to thank Ministry and Council co-clerks Robin and Gail, and Lawrence in particular for doing the Zoom. And I want to acknowledge Cynthia Kuza, who is my elder in this work and who will be holding the space and holding me and holding our work in light and love. Thank you, Cynthia, who's the clerk of my spiritual accountability committee. So a little bit more later for that. Let's go to the next slide, please. This is a wonderful thing because it's kind of funny. So our 8th grandchild was born a little bit before January 2018. His name is Felix. We went to visit his family in Durham, and his new sister was born 3 days ago. in Durham. So there's something, serendipitous about this, right? And his sister Claudia Beatrix was born 3 days ago. So Rebecca and I, when we go to visit our different families, on the East Coast, including the one in Durham, we go to the meeting, right? We go to meetings, right? So we went to the Durham Friends meeting, and I was just blown away, absolutely blown away. And it was so wonderful because, it's all connected with family then, right? So there were about 100 people there at the Durham Friends meeting in January 2018, and about 35 young people. So about 135 or 140 people, for us, our meetings here, it's a little big, and it was a gathered meeting. And what I mean by that is that, everything was linked, everything was wonderful. And the clerk, whoever was clerk, I'm not sure it was the clerk of the meeting as such, but of that particular worship, named it as the gathered meeting. And it was so cool because, it was like, what am I doing here? You know what I mean? What is this about? So I had the experience, right? The embodied experience of a gathered meeting. And, it meant that there were just a few messages. They were all connected and they were linked, as it says here. But it was that experience which was really important to me. And I learned that the Durham meeting is both part of North Carolina Yearly Meeting Conservative, right, and Friends General Conference. So there's a kind of intersection with those two meetings. And in the North Carolina Yearly Meeting Conservative, there's a whole section about being gathered and in communion. So and it's very Christian oriented in that particular meeting. But this was kind of a congruence of both. So I'm so thrilled to have the origins of this, right, be personal, and about my 8th grandchild, and now we have the 9th one, his baby sister. So here we are. Can we have the next slide, please? So I tried all this out, being me, and I'm trained as an academic, but this is a weird project for me because, it started out, I want to figure it out. I want to see what the research is. I want to see what everything is and all that. And my interviews with people are part of a research project, but this turned out very devotionally. So I'm just thankful that, there's some integration in my own journey, right? That both as a scholar and a researcher, but also as a practicing Quaker and a person who needs a kind of wholeness that I didn't even realize. So anyway, as part of this process, then I reached out to our Santa Monica meeting, and so the work that I'm doing is under the care of a spiritual accountability group, of which Cynthia, my elder, is here with us now, and also the other people are here too. Clayton Fawcett and Rachel Fretz. So the three of us have met for 2 years or so, on various aspects of what's going on, including when I was a Carroll Scholar. And I'm still involved in now my 3rd revision and the last revision of a Pendle Hill pamphlet. We'll see what happens with that, but it not my will, but thine. Okay. So yeah, and so we've tried this out different places, and I'm so thankful to be held like this, both by the spiritual accountability group, but also by my own meeting, which recognizes as a leading, and it kind of has its connection is important to me, because what this does is it challenges my individualistic upbringing in my small town in Vermont. And I love my upbringing in some ways, but it was very, it was all about me. What do I need? And the gathered meeting is all about what are we doing there, and how can I contribute to the group, and what's that about? So it kind of shifts from an individualistic framework to a more communal framework and a more community one. And the spiritual accountability group, and Cynthia and Rachel and Clayton, really helped me on this. They help, hold me. They're critique, but they're connecting me both to the spirit and to the community and to the wider Quaker reality. Okay, so can we go to the next slide, Lawrence? So I had questions, right? I'm not going to go through them all and stuff, but this was an extraordinary process for me, because I found that the people that I talked to, these 55 friends, about a third of them pastors, or Quaker pastors or Quaker pastoral friends. They were my teachers. They became my teachers, which is, I mean, how good is that, right? I mean, come on. You're doing this research project. It's a qualitative research project, and you find the inner teachers, speaking to you. Okay, so basically, excuse me. So I asked them, what's the gathered meeting? What does it mean to you, right? Have you had the experience in a gathered meeting? Do you anticipate there being a gathered meeting? And does it matter to you? And do you talk about it and think about it? So it was just extraordinary. And I did it on Zoom mostly because I got kicked out of Pendle Hill, right? Because it was in March in the 2020. But it was important in Pendle Hill because Francisco Burgos was the incoming executive director, and he really helped me with the Zoom part. And I realized on the Zoom that the audio aspects of the Zoom are extraordinary. No workarounds, the audio. So I sent this stuff to San Francisco to a service up there, and it was absolutely, I got wonderful transcripts back. So thank you, everybody, for that. Okay, so let's go to the next slide, Lawrence. So I talked to 55 people, about half women, half men, mostly from the States, mostly from the East Coast. I apologize to West Coast friends. I got oriented when I was at Pendle Hill. But 4 people from England and 1 person from Australia, and 18 people who were programmed or pastoral friends, including a number of pastors. Actually, it was really dramatic to me because in the middle of my research project, talking to people and finding out who they were and all that, one of the friends who was a non-pastoral friend said, Stan, maybe you should really talk to these pastoral friends. Maybe you should get to know other people. And she had a list of like 15 or 20 people. Anyway, so that happens. So let's go to the next slide, please. So what you do is you reflect on all this and you draw out, and I'm just giving you a few examples of what's going on. But here's someone who I just love what she's saying about the gathered meeting. And this is a Philadelphia Quaker, actually. So I'm giving a couple of definitions. They're in some ways individualistic, but I think they're representative of what people are saying. So here's what she says. The gathered meeting goes along with the Quaker, all the Quaker distinctives, really the testimony she's talking about. Everything that is integrity and simplicity and peace, all the fruits of our spiritual life, right, could potentially lead to the gathered meeting. Our flat hierarchy, our appreciation of people on the margins, and our passion for social justice. And I like that inclusivity and that way of thinking about it, both the spirit and the actual work in the world. All of these things would tend to lead there, but it is not our doing. And this is really important for me. It's not our doing. It is an act of God when there is a gathered meeting. That's what I heard. That really resonated. That resonated with these friends. So pleasing God, doing the will of God, and being in unity with God in the whole of our lives. And so my reaction to this is, of course, to sing, to do amens and all that kind of stuff. I didn't do that, but that's part of my response to this. These are very deepening aspects, and I think what the whole study is about is how do we deepen our spiritual lives together. Period. That's what it's all about, and I'm just thrilled to be involved in that. Could we have the next slide, please? So the other thing that really occurs to me as we're going along here is that this was a kind of, what I discovered was an embodiment of knowing. I realized that this was not a study about the head, because this is supposed to be research and scholarship, right? About the mind, and of course it is. But what I found was it was about the heart, and it was about my heart, and about the soul, and about my soul, and about the embodied heart and soul. And this is a different emphasis, it seems to me, and a different kind of knowing. I'll keep coming back to this. So anyway, so here's a person who talks about how the gathered meeting is part of this embodied energy. Okay, one of the things, this is a woman, I forget where she's from. One of the things that I experienced, both in my body and then also spiritually, is a sense of swirling energy, as well as an image of angels circling the room. I'll go there. Come on, let's do it. There's definitely for me an image of swirling motion. And I think that is the main marker for a gathered meeting, that it's a shared experience. So that's one of the things that makes it very rare. I love this talk. This speaks to my heart. It's very rare because we are so prone to individualism. That's my problem. And in our spiritual experience and in the way we expect to come into God's presence. But now we come into God's presence, both as individuals, of course, and as connected to the group. So it's that gestalt that she's thinking about. Let's have the next slide, please, Lawrence. And this keeps going. This is the same person. I think that we really recognize this thing, that is the gathered meeting, is beyond our control and not ours to manufacture, but ours to receive. I love this biblical language here, with fear and trembling and gratitude, because it's an incarnation. Yeah, nice Christian language. I love this. It's God infusing the body of friends as the body, beyond our individual bodies, beyond me sitting in my bench and my husband sitting next to me and our friend over there. We become one body that is incarnate of God. So is an experience of collective mysticism. God is real, and God shows up in this way as well as in many other ways. You know, that would be enough, right? I mean, I'm all done. That's it, you know, good enough. Bye-bye. So some reflections about this. Lawrence, let's do the next slide, please. So some reflections about this. It's really important in this study and in my own understanding of it, that this is an experience, right? This is not some kind of head game. This is not an idea. I mean, I love ideas, right? But this is not it. If you want that, I don't know where you go, but not here. So I think so that people are swept into a collective communal net, and that the typical individualism becomes transformed. That's one of the sort of aspects of this study that's really stands out to me. You know, so there's another power, another source at work, right? And it's not one's own willing or yearning or desiring, although that's part of it, right? So it's sort of paradoxical or ironic, right? And so we understand that experience through listening to these conversations, right? And being carried along into God's presence by grace. So God infuses a worshiping group with an incarnational energy and binds the participants together. Now, the quintessential incarnation is in John's gospel, in the first 13 lines of the gospel according to John, right? And that's about Christ, and that's about Jesus Christ. But I'm saying here, this incarnational aspect of God infused in the body is not necessarily only about Jesus, but it's also more universalist. So I'll come back to that in a minute. Let's go to the next slide, Lawrence, please. So I want to pause a little bit and just say what's coming next. Okay, so that's a kind of introductory sense. This is some sense of what a gathered meeting is to a couple people. That's quintessential about the whole study. And then the next part of it is I'm thinking about, I want to say something more about embodied spirituality. I want to talk a little bit about the need for a spiritual center for the gathered meeting, whether it's Jesus or something else, or the Spirit. And then talk about my own journey. So those are the things I'd like to do next. I think that's enough of that. Lawrence, let's go to the next slide. I love, these are examples of what I'm talking about in terms of a different way of knowing in what I heard from people, right? And a holistic way of knowing, and a way of knowing that's embodied, what I'm calling embodied. So here's an example of that from one friend, right? So he's talking about the gathered meeting in terms of embodiment and what it means for him. I think that actually when one listens deeply enough, he says, and everybody's listening together, I have a hunch that our heartbeats actually synchronize. And that in this, when our heartbeats synchronize and we can feel the beating of the corporate heart in our bodies, there seems to me to be that thickening of the air that can be experienced in a gathered meeting. Now, well, let me read the next one too. Let's go to the next slide, Lawrence. I'll put these two together. I don't know, continuing the same person. I don't know that that's true because it's a corporate thing, right? But I think lots of people talk about there was a sense of thickness in the air. There was no ministry given, but some kind of a thickness happened. And and some of it, like the heat comes down upon you, like the physical heat of our bodies being together. So this language of embodiment and of the corporate beating of the heart, that's just what I need. My heart beats really low and I have some flutter problems sometimes, and I want this corporate heart. It'll be a good experience for me. The beats will be a little more steady, and it won't, but I'm just making this up. But I mean, that beating of the heart, that metaphor of the heart beating together, and we're all beating together, is very powerful to me. I mean, I take it personally. Of course, I take everything personally, but that's all right. So let's have the next slide, please. So what I want to make as a overall point about this embodiment is that those metaphors are powerful. That this expressive thickening of the air is really interesting. I mean, it's so visceral, right? It's so present physically, and that there's a harmony or a merging or something between the individual and the community as part of this synchronization, and all that. And it's what it's about is a transforming consciousness. That's what I'd like to say too. Let's go to the next slide, please. This is somebody else talking about it in some similar ways, actually. So another participant, quote, I noticed my body sometimes and just moving in that way when we are so gathered. Other times a sense of being so weighted and rooted that I couldn't move if I wanted to. And I experienced a level of openness of heart and spirit. I yearn for and hope for to touch again on that experience of unity of rootedness, not just with each other, but with God. And I love that language of being rooted, to the roots, so the radical sense of that, and the sense of experience that way. Let's go to the next slide. Thank you. So this embodied spirituality aspect of the gathered meeting speaks to me deeply, and that I think what's interesting is that incarnational quality that the one woman talked about earlier, that the divine and the spirit are manifest in the body of the worshipers, right? And so there's a present moment aspect to it, which is really important, and the incarnational aspects speak deeply to me as well, with these people who didn't necessarily talk about Jesus, but anyway. So it is a version of the word made flesh in a sense. I mean, so here we are together in that integrated experience. So there's kind of a fusion or a unity between the body, mind, heart, and soul that at least momentarily are present that way. Let's go to the next slide. So while it wasn't articulated like this, as clearly as this, I think a lot of the participants in this research project talked about the need for some kind of center for a gathered meeting, because if it's all just a kind of a hodgepodge of individuals, then it's hard to have this gathered experience, or this unified experience. So one person put it very succinctly, so I'm using this as an example. So So one of the participants commented directly about the need for a clearly defined spiritual center for the gathered meeting, that this seemed really important to him. Quote, I think that we need some center as a community. It doesn't have to be Jesus or the presence of Christ, but there needs to be some center, because without a center, we start to police boundaries. You know, oh, that's what's the matter with this? Oh, what's the matter with that? So we're looking for a center. So so the next kind of slides, I want to talk about the center, and either the center being Jesus himself or a more universalist center. So I'd like to sing another hymn to get me there in the right place. It's called Softly and Tenderly, Jesus is Calling. I don't know whether you know this. It's a wonderful gospel hymn. I'm just going to read the first, I'm going to sing the first verse, but it helps me to get in the right place. Softly and tenderly, Jesus is calling, calling for you and for me. See on the portals, he's waiting and watching, watching for you and for me. Come home, come home. All ye are weary, come home. Earnestly, tenderly, Jesus is calling, calling, oh Quaker, come home. That's nice. I love the idea that it comes from Revelations 3:20. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and open the door, I will come unto him, sup with him, be with him. It's great stuff. I could do it. The singing will do it. So I asked friends about all this, you know, and thought about with them the presence of Jesus in the gathered meeting. So it's so interesting to me. So for some friends, particularly pastoral friends from North Carolina yearly meeting conservative, not, you know, different places of North Carolina. So some friends, Jesus, it was a very intimate Jesus, right? Not an idea about Jesus, not like, oh, we should believe in Jesus and he's our savior. No, not that stuff. But Jesus being present in the worship, right? Being present as a guide, comforter, and healer, right? And embodied presence, I would say, using the language that I've picked up already, right? So it's Jesus in that case, excuse me, who binds a group together and inspires unity and communion and connection. All right, so let's have the next slide. I'm sorry, yeah, and the next slide too, the 21. Thank you. So this is one Quaker pastor who articulated some of this. I can tell you what role Jesus plays for me in a gathered meeting for sure. I use all the language that is possible. Now, this is a pastoral friend. This is an actual pastor, you know. I use all the language that is possible to keep things open for people wherever they are. But, you know, Jesus is with me, and I want to say Jesus is with me all the time. And so for me, Jesus is often sitting beside me on the bench. And I have seen this, and I have seen this, and I'm one of these that sees things, and I have seen Jesus walking amongst us. Amen, amen, amen. Another illustration. Quote, the presence of Jesus. On the next slide, I'm sorry. Yeah, you know, thank you, Lawrence, sorry. You know, they may talk more about the Christ or light, but for me, you know, as I say, Jesus has often been sitting beside me in meeting for worship, or I often see him in the meeting room being with, you know, of course, being with those people who need his loving presence. So this is not the idea of Jesus. This is not the concept. This is not the theology, right? Next slide, please. So, so there's something intimate about this, right? It's something personal about it. The immediate presence of Jesus. And there's a book by David Johns actually called Quaker Theology. I mean, you know, it's okay as a book. It's a little disjointed to me, but But he talks about incarnational spirituality, that word of incarnation. So that embodiment idea is both a matter of theology and of practice, but I'm more focused on the practice, right? So, but I really like this. What I really like about it, and what I respond to personally, is the intimate, personal, embodied Jesus, and Jesus as a presence, as a healer, and all that. So let's have the next slide, please. So there's also many of the friends didn't talk about Jesus in this way, of course. These are pastoral friends. These are actual pastors, in fact. But they talked about still the need for a center, right? A spiritual center of the gathered meeting. And that they talk about it, and my sense of it, as a kind of consciousness, a transformation of consciousness. And I'm going to give a workshop on the second point with Cynthia and other people. There's a letting go of the self or ego that seems distinctive, it's sort of giving over to the spirit, giving over to the light, giving over to the inner teacher, talking about it like that. So it's the focus of the gathered meeting here, that it's in terms of the spirit or light or more universalist, and not about Jesus showing up in person that way. So here's one person who talks about this. Lawrence, the next slide. This 25. Yeah, thank you. It's an extreme letting go. That is the presence of the center of the gathered meeting. And I think George Fox was writing about it when he talked about going through the flaming sword. It cuts off everything you think you know, all your pride, all your everything. And you've been burst into this inseparable oneness kind of thing. And I was hungry to go back there all the time, but it's like you can't live there because it's not here. And you can just tap into it and have it guide you. So there's a person experiencing this kind of what I would call cosmic consciousness, this kind of mystical wholeness and oneness, as it were, but saying it's temporary, it's immediate, and it's present, but it's hard to articulate exactly. And she uses that imagery from Fox, and that flaming sword has to do with how Fox recalls the Garden of Eden, where Adam and Eve have been kicked out, and the angel is there to have a flaming sword to keep them out from going back in again. And Fox goes back in. He goes back into paradise. And that's the sense that she's talking about here. So next slide, please. So this is a way. So this woman has a sense of this journey to wholeness and oneness, which I really appreciate. I compare it, that is the gathered meeting, in the sense of being whole this way. I compare it somewhat to the Kundalini awakening and going into nirvana as a Buddhist, and Holy Communion, the actual experience. So this is quite universalist, right? Right? So she's referencing all these different ways of experiencing this. I think it's a cosmic thing, and that it's in everybody that's been here for centuries. I just resonate with this language. I have a feeling it's a consciousness, that of God, in everybody, that I think there's a consciousness, that it's a consciousness thing. And in that consciousness, you tap into that and it gets more frequent. Maybe I don't know what happens, who has it, but there've been times when I've been in it so that I can see the light. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. That's an alternative visionary experience from the presence of Jesus. So let's have the next slide. Thank you. So I'm just summarizing it, but so I've got these two kind of competing centers, but in this particular center, there's a sense of the living presence of the spirit, right? And the names are not so important here, but there's many names, right? And the spirit is something that unifies and connects the gathered worshipers, that there's an experience or feeling of communion. And my sense of it is that it's a different way of knowing, or a different way of being, that is open to. to us here. So the next slide, please. So I'd like to move to a kind of a personal application of it, I guess I want to say, because what happened to me in all this is that, so I'm doing all this research, I'm talking to all these people, they're teaching me, I'm paying attention, I'm going deeper, I'm realizing that we need to go deeper into the worship, but I'm realizing that what I'm really missing in my own life is present here. And that's something else, right? So my own spiritual life, my own spiritual autobiography, if you will, is implicated in all this. And what I mean by that is that I felt as I went along here that, oh, my life has been, my feeling about it, not the actual experience at times, but that my experience of wholeness here is really important as a healing process for me, right? And the healing process comes from, I was brought up from birth by my grandparents, my father's parents, in a small town in Vermont. My mother had a terrible schizophrenic breakdown soon after I was born. My father was in the Air Force, right? I had no father, no mother. And my grandmother was really wonderful. She was a great person. She was very important to me, but it's not the same. You have there's a hole there. There's a hole in my bucket, dear Liza. Dear Liza. There's a hole there. And it's just there. I mean, that's the way it is. And that's okay. And that's a deep shadow side for me. But this research then all of a sudden, or not all of a sudden, but over a period of time became personal, right? And it became a search for my own wholeness, right? And for my own need for healing, which is a little different, than being a scholar and a researcher, right? It became totally devotional, as it were, right? So let me read what's in front of you, but that's just a framework for this. So all my life I have struggled with what might be called the divided self, and that's true. Divided, right? Not whole, searching, finding things, and whatever. And I'm saying I'm done with it. But this has helped me do that. I could blame my mother, I could blame the culture, I could blame whatever, but that's not the point. It's just a shadow side part of me, right? But when I read Parker Palmer's book, A Hidden Wholeness, it really spoke to me. It's a 2004 book that, Parker has published all kinds of stuff, but it's called A Hidden Wholeness, the journey toward an undivided life. And that's exactly what kind of got my attention, and what I was searching for was right in front of me. Right, was right here in this spiritual journey. So, actually, the title of the book comes from Thomas Merton, one of his short essays in a collect. He has dozens of books that he wrote, Thomas Merton. But one of the essays that he wrote is about Sophia, the goddess of wisdom, and how Mary and Sophia are connected, and that feminine wisdom is underneath the surface of everything, and there's a kind of hidden wholeness in Sophia and this feminist deity, and that's what Merton was writing about, and that's the title of Parker's book, right? So it comes from Thomas Merton. So I'll just read the second paragraph there. So I just said that, and then paradoxically, holding together opposites, right? It's what this is about. Quote, in the visible world of nature, great truth is concealed in plain sight. Diminishment and beauty, darkness and light, death and life are no opposites. They are held together in the paradox of hidden wholeness. So that's what I am responding to and kind of trying to integrate into my own life and into my work on the gathered meeting. So let's have the next slide, please. Thank you. Right. So it's interesting because it's really spoke to me deeply. I'll just read what I said there. I learned that it's critical for me, but really for my soul, to let go blaming, worrying, judging about how the spiritual center must be Jesus or not Jesus or whatnot. I'm through with that. My soul craves what a psychologist might identify as a third force. This alternative force or way revolves around the needs of my soul and its connection to deep wholeness holiness and wholeness underneath the words. And that's what the people were saying to me. That's what the gathered meeting is about. That underlying unity of wholeness and hope and healing. So in order to hold together multiple centers, what's the center? What's the center of the gathered meeting? I need to care for my soul's yearning, wrapped up as it happens to be in love and affection for the communities, Quaker community circles of trust. This is his terms, Palmer's terms. This yearning for wholeness and harmony flows from the caring soul. It's critical for me to sink into the arms of the inner teacher and guide. And I think about Walden the same way and stuff. Let's have the next slide, please. So it's interesting because so this work becomes soul work for me, and it also is thematically very important to me in the relationships between the individual or the community, or in solitude and community, right? This speaks to me, and I think Palmer's urging friends to create a space for the intellect and emotions and the will can emerge all together, right? So there's something holistic about this. There's something integrated about this in terms of one's personality. Yeah, so Palmer's book really spoke to me. Let's go to the next slide. So this is Palmer's language. It was important to me to see this. So a quote: "A circle of trust is a group of people who know how to sit quietly in the woods, as it were, with each other and wait for the shy soul to show up. The relationships in such a group are not pushy, but patient. They are not confrontational, but compassionate. They are filled not with the expectations and demands, but with abiding faith in the reality of the inner teacher and each person's capacity to learn from it." So this really spoke to me. This is what I was hearing from my people who talked to me, and this is what I was realizing I needed for my own life. Let's go to the next slide, please. We're almost done. So it was important to me to have these people speak to me in ways that were heartening, that were healing, and that were integrative for me. And so my takeaways about this and the need for a center, which I think is true, are they in the forms of various questions. Why can't we approach the gathered meeting and let go of the dominant culture's need to judge, divide, and play a zero-sum game of winners and losers? So it's not about winning and losing, it's about wholeness, right? It's not about why can't we be in love with our community and deep in our hearts and souls that understand everything else. We are both in love with one another and with a divine presence. Let's have the next slide, Lawrence, please. So it's quite a challenge for me to let go of the evaluating and judging and all that in terms of the gathered meeting and is this right? Is this wrong? But I really tried to let go of that, and I think that the embodied Quaker voices speak to me with kind of real authority. So the authority here is in the experience of the gathered meeting, not in the ideas about it, and I think that's really important for me. And in the end, I mean, I think the last hymn will kind of get at this. I think we are together, in fact, right here, right now, but every time we worship, we are standing on holy ground. And I think recognizing that is really key to some of this searching in my case. Let's go to the next slide. I want to acknowledge that this has been really important, that there's been that the community is kind of infused in my own work here. So this has really been important, and I love being at Pendle Hill even for a short period of time. But the people there have become part of me, I think. So that's a really important point. And the Santa Monica community in general, I mean, the worship and ministry committee and the business meeting and everything else, but particularly the spiritual accountability group of Cynthia and Rachel and Clayton have been wonderful. I mean, it's just been extraordinary. And when I did the workshop up at Ben Lomond, that was important too. So I appreciate all of that. I'd like to close by singing a short hymn. Let's go to the last slide, Lawrence, please. It's a short hymn called "Take Off Your Shoes." But what's important about it, I think, is a context. It comes from Exodus 3:5 about the burning bush, where God speaks to Moses directly and says, "I am that I am," that one. But he also says to him, let's see where it says, he speaks out of the burning bush and he says, "This is holy ground you're standing on here. So take off your shoes and realize that you're standing on holy ground." Okay. So that's the prophetic voice of the Lord to Moses. What is it? Exodus 3:5. So this is my version of it, right? And this is a wonderful hymn. This is a kind of a 70s hymn. And on the piano, it's really good because there's a lot of jazz feeling about it, but I'll do my best I can. Right. And this will be the end of it. So basically, it comes from that Exodus statement. Take off your shoes, you're standing on holy ground. Here it goes. Take off your shoes, you're standing on holy ground. And so baby, take off your shoes, you're standing on holy ground. The earth is our God's and the fullness thereof, from the waters beneath to the heavens above. So take off your shoes, you're standing on the holy ground. You're standing on my holy ground. Amen.
Thank you, Stan, for sharing your research with us. I think you can see some hands waving in the gathering of friends here this morning. And I'm going to try to stop recording. Let's see.